3 new speakers, and this time we're actually going to have you guys stay on the stage while you speak. So you're going to be like the up close and personal audience here for these folks. So we have Redzic, Senior Vice President, Connected Driving here. Aji's going to talk about automated driving, how it's going to give us back our freedom on the road and make driving fun again. I'm going to give you that for just a minute here. We have Reilly, Brennan, Executive Director at the Revs program at Stanford University. He's going to talk some safety. And Boehm, Southern California Regional Director for California High-Speed Rail. Welcome Michelle to the stage. She's going to talk about the future with lots of transportation options. In fact, how high-speed rail is going to play an important role in this blended system. So up first.
Thank you very much. My name is Redzic. I'm responsible for Connected Driving Business Group within HERE. And those of you who don't know, HERE is a global leader in digital mapping and connected services for the car. So these days we enable not only 9 out of 10 nav systems in a car, but also work very closely with OEMs on building automated driving capabilities. So what I wanted to take you down the memory lane first and talk a little bit about how driving used to be. So our roads were emptier, our cars were bigger. People getting a car meant that they could really find some personal freedom. It meant that they could move away from where they worked. It meant that they didn't have to leave by train. It meant that they didn't have to rely on bus schedules. It also meant that people started to move to suburbs en masse. So society adapted to the fact that car became available. We built drive-through restaurants. We built drive-in movie theaters. And in general, people just enjoy driving. They developed love for the car, and they adapted their lifestyle to the car itself. But then you fast forward to today, and what you see today, what I see today when I come to LA, I try to stay as close as possible to where I'm going to work. So today I stayed in a hotel around the corner because I really didn't want to deal with LA traffic. And obviously a lot of people, all of you in the audience, have this experience every day. So what to do about it? The car is no longer an object of fun. The car becomes almost a burden. What we see today when we look for parking, circle around, worry about how much we're going to pay, worry about the fact that we have to charge a car or put gasoline in it, how expensive it is. We're very conscious of the fact that we're polluting the world as we are idling unnecessarily in traffic, as we saw in previous presentation. So we believe very firmly that there are a couple of really important things for us to solve as an industry. One is, how do you get fun back into driving? How do you get people to start enjoying it again? But the second thing is also issue of safety. I mean, as we get more of these things on the road, and there's about 1 billion cars on the road these days, like 1 billion cars that are actually in production in the world. There's 1.2 million people die every year on the roads in the world. In US alone, 33,000 you heard, but 3.9 million are injured. There's 24 million accidents or some kind of damage to the car every year, and we ship less than 20 million in US, so you know that this is a massive number. And then you look at the other societal costs of all these vehicles on the road. It becomes very obvious as an industry we really need to move and move much quicker. So what are we doing? I think the good news is that a lot of steps are already being taken, right? So cars are getting connected, sensors are becoming much better, we have a lot more data to process. The vehicles themselves, just like human race with communication, developing of the language became much more intelligent. I think the same thing is happening in the cars. There's so much more data for cars to process and react to and adopt. So where do we believe we're going? Well, I think, and don't take my word for it, this is really more of an industry speaking, we're talking about moving into the first step called highly automated driving. And highly automated driving essentially means, yes, you have to be awake, and no, you cannot be drinking because you need to take control of the vehicle, but you will be allowed to do other things while in vehicle, at least on long stretches of boring, mindless driving, which is what bothers a lot of people today. So this is our view of how this might work in a few years from now. You will still have a steering wheel, but that steering wheel will look slightly different. You will be able to use your car for communication, for infotainment. You will do things in the car that actually increase your quality of life and not just wasting time in it. You can imagine that heads-up display will be across the entire screen. That technology is already being tested. And you can imagine also that the screen in front of you will combine both your center stack screen and your cluster screen. So that whole display in front of you will become available for whatever you want to do with it. What we're showing here is a map, of course, as a mapping company, but imagine watching movies on it. But this is just the first step, right? So we expect that the highly automated driving, which will happen again in about 4 years, and we know that because we see programs with OEMs that are getting closer and closer to production. What you're going to see next, and you can certainly expect to see fully automated driving, or what you call autonomous driving. So fully automated driving will allow us to truly start enjoying our time in the car. And today, again, going back to safety, 26 out of 91 deaths in the US are due to people drinking and driving. Well, hopefully, those 26 deaths will not have to happen once we have this capability. But also, it will allow us to connect more. The fact that you can take your family and really, time that you spent in the car, use it more intelligently, use it for more fun. We can hopefully start bringing some of that fun back into our driving experience every day. And then, in the end, when you think about it, the drive-in movie theater may have a completely different meaning because we do expect that, again, the whole industry will completely reshape itself, and the transportation of the future will be very different than transportation that we have today. So I want to thank you very much and pass it on to the next speaker.
Good morning, I'm Reilly Brennan from Stanford, and thanks for having me here. I'm going to wait for my slides to come up. So today, I'm going to not talk about cars, I'm going to talk about people. That's what we do a lot of research with at Stanford. And you know, when I think about the way that the world is changing, one of the things that we haven't realized is that the Earth has essentially flipped. And we're in the middle of this intersection at the moment from moving from one sort of large majority to another. And if we go back to 1950, there were roughly 3 billion people in the world. About 2/3 of these people lived in rural areas, about 1/3 in urban. And most of the companies you see here at the show and the services and the systems we provide to people were designed either at this time or before it. And there's an interesting shift going on, which is that this is all changing. In fact, it's hard to see things like this change because individually we might be living in an area and not move from it, but also the intersection just happened. So in about 2007, 2008 is when we flipped from really being a dominant rural Earth to an urban dominant Earth. And if you take data from the UN or the World Bank or any reputable sources, 2050 is probably going to have about 10 billion people in it, and it's probably going to be about 2/3 urban. Now, since all charts tell the truth and also lie, you can also look at this chart and see that actually the rural population added 1 billion people as well. So that's a huge amount of growth. And the number of rural inhabitants in 2050 are going to be the size, the population size of the Earth was in 1950. So it doesn't mean that everything has to get thrown out from the old system. But what this means for all of us here is that we have to think about the design of systems in cities and in services a lot differently than we have. And our view is that that's actually going to provide a lot of great opportunities for not only research, but also companies and new ideas that we're really looking forward to. So about 2/3 in 2050 that will be urban. So if you take nothing else away from my short talk this morning, just remember that the people are going to be in a different place certainly now, but in 2050. The other thing about it is that the behavior and the lengths of the lives of these people are changing. So, in a baby born in 2014 has a 50-50 chance of living to age 100. And so you have people who are not only going to be using different systems, but also the behaviors of these people are going to be quite different. So if you're going to think about designing products and services for transportation, this is really valuable information. Perhaps these people are going to be owning vehicles like today's vehicles where they drive more. So if you're selling cars, that maybe means you get more ownership cycles out of them. If they're not driving, they still want independence and mobility. So if you consider that, there is going to be a huge part of services, sort of post-vehicle ownership, that could be made available to a huge number of these people in really the next 50 to 100 years. So those are some of the problems and the fundamentals I've laid out. And I've given you no solutions. That's what hopefully we can talk about during Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good morning. So in the state of California, we are currently planning the largest infrastructure project underway in the United States. And that infrastructure project has to address all of the topics that you've heard talked about today. And in order to do that, we are looking at how you deploy time, space, and resources to everyone in a different way than we're deploying it right now. If in your life you are working a traditional 8-hour day, and that may not be the case in the future, but if you spend 2 hours a day getting to that workplace and 2 hours a day getting from that workplace, you're now spending 10 hours a day at that activity. And if we, as a multi-industry and an infrastructure initiative, both looking at our transportation infrastructure and the technology that can use that infrastructure, can get people to that job more quickly, we can transform basically the way that we are living right now. If we can develop connected transportation hubs at station locations where all modes of transportation come together and talk to one another in order to provide the best possible use of your time, space, and resources, then we can truly make a difference and address the revolution that's underway right now that my previous speaker spoke about. The revolution of the movement basically to the metropolitan living and metropolitan hubs. And if you think about it, technology has to some degree led the way here. As we've gone through space and time, technology has changed. When we started, we had dial-up modems, and that allowed us to move a certain amount of data at a certain speed, right, and a certain capacity. And as we've moved through space and time, we've added T1 lines, and then we've added fiber optic lines. And so now we can move much greater amounts of data much faster from one place to another. And that is really essentially what high-speed rail is for the state of California. It is a way to move much greater numbers of people much faster between metropolitan centers. If you can now move from the Antelope Valley to the San Fernando Valley in less than 20 minutes, instead of it taking you 2 hours, that is a radical redeployment of time and resources for your life and for other people's lives as well. Because if we provide people a choice, a transportation choice, if we provide people a transportation choice, then all modes of transportation operate better. If some people are making the choice to get on a high-speed linkage to go between metropolitan areas rather than get on the road, that's opening up space on our highways for other travelers for whom that mode is going to be the most convenient. And we've heard a lot of speakers talk about the connected cars. And essentially, those connected cars are ways that we can use the space that we have deployed in our highways in a more efficient manner. We can put more cars on those highways and run them more efficiently if those cars can travel much closer together. So it's about our time, our space, and our resources. It's about making that trip seamless, and we've heard about that, from the stoplights to the parking, right? We want at transportation hubs, at station locations, we don't want to warehouse cars. We want cars to come and drop people off and move on to the next trip so that you can maximize the use of that piece of infrastructure to society and to your day. And so those are all the things that we're looking at the state of California when we're looking at building a high-speed train. And that high-speed train is really that fiber optic connection for the technology, for the people, to the metropolitan areas. And our cars are our smartphones of the transportation infrastructure. They are that mobile source that follows you everywhere you go, but sometimes you need that fiber optic connection to get that massive data or that massive people back and forth as fast as you want them to get back and forth. So we are really about, again, time, space, and resources. If we can deploy those better, that means that you spend less time doing what you have to do and more time doing what you want to do. And that's the future that we want to plan for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, fascinating. Are you guys enjoying this? This is really fascinating stuff, getting us all to think about these future scenarios. Do we have any questions for our panelists here? We talked about, I mean, fantastic comparison between the dial-up and the highway of the future being sort of fiber optic. I never thought about that before, but really amazing. Question here.
I don't know if that camera was well placed. I'm blocking it. Reilly, the urban-rural mix, that may connote kind of a misunderstanding that 2/3 is going to be in sort of central urban areas. Mm-hmm. I mean, that urbanized still counts a lot of suburban settings. So could you kind of talk a little bit about that and how that implicates all these conversations?
What I'll probably do is actually punt to the United Nations definition of that, which I probably couldn't give you a good cogent response on at the moment, but you're absolutely right that they're not as distinct as dense, high-rise living versus country and mountain living. I just picked those two images for the purposes of my slides, but you're right. The distinction for us looking forward is that this idea of megacities, where you have roughly people living in a core of 10 million or above, is going to be a reality of of the future. But right now there's something like 20 or so megacities, and in I think it's 2037 there'll be 40, or by 2040 there'll be 37, something like that. So these are dense cores where you have people wanting to do different things. So sometimes this means you're buying fewer things, but you're buying them more often. So maybe instead of buying the proverbial, like 2-gallon thing of detergent, you're buying them in smaller quantities, but you want them delivered to your house, once a week or something like that. And that's a really sort of simple example, but there are all sorts of things that you can think about behavior-wise that will change when you move to a core like that. I have a question for my panelists here. Am I allowed to ask a question?
Let me see what the judges say.
Did you?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things about mapping that frustrates me right now is that it's never exactly where I am, and I live in a city. I live in San Francisco, and I always feel like it's across the street from me. And what's your take on the accuracy of mapping, getting to exactly where you are? Because I know we rely on a lot of great technology, but it's kind of old, right?
Sure. So I'll answer that. It's a very good question. Actually, there are two kinds of maps. One kind of map that's used for navigation, which is what you use for your use case. If you want to go to a restaurant, you type in your address, and then we'll drop you off, maybe on the wrong side of the street, but within vicinity, you'll figure it out. And frankly, these things are much better now than they used to be. But for automated driving, the map is entirely different. It's a map that's just being built. We call it high definition map, and that map is centimeter precision. So it's really, it doesn't have things like unnecessary points of interest, restaurants. That's not necessary. What's really necessary is to have the road infrastructure extremely well modeled. So each lane is individually modeled in the database, and then all lanes are connected to all the other lanes, so you can really get through legal maneuvers from any point to any point on the road network. A lot of investment going into it. It's not trivial, and it requires super high expensive equipment to build this map.
So do you think that that is going to be the roadways and the objects in the infrastructure that are sensed, or do vehicles give each other position because there's a lot of vehicles on the road and therefore they can sort of provide a network that...
So the way we approach it with OEMs is that you build a reference network first. So there's a base map that you build, and then you update that map if the vehicle observes anything that's different than what it expects, what's in its database, then it will actually update the map both in a cloud and its own local cluster.
Excellent questions.
Great
All right,
question.
let's give a big round of applause to our second group of speakers here. Aji Redzic, Reilly Brennan, and Michelle Boehm. Thank you so much. And